Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 7 of High Rollers, the review series for the most expensive classic cars that GT6 has to offer. And in this episode we're featuring one of the most expensive cars in the game. Technically it's the most expensive car in the game, but as there are a number of vehicles with the same price, it's really the joint most expensive car in the game. And it is, of course, the 1969 Gulf liveried Ford GT40. Now this version of the GT40 costs almost 10 times the price, well, yeah, almost 10 times the price of the road-going version. It's powered by a 5-litre naturally aspirated V8, or a 302 cubic inch, which puts out, when fully tuned, just under 700 horsepower. It's actually 699, and it also puts out 571 pound-feet of torque. Now all of that power and torque is in a vehicle that only weighs 998 kilos, so the power-to-weight ratio per tonne is a very impressive 700, and the PP, incidentally, when fully tuned, sits at 607, which possibly isn't as high as you might expect when fully tuned. Now, this Ford is undoubtedly my personal favourite classic car in the game. It's just such a cool car. It's also so nostalgic for me because this is a car which has been in the Gran Turismo series, as far as I'm aware, since the first game, definitely since the second game. It's been in every single Gran Turismo game since the second one, and it's always been such a cool car. No matter what any other vehicle in the game turned out like, you could always guarantee that the Ford would look great, would be difficult to get, and would sound awesome. And nothing's changed there. It still looks great, it's hard to get because it's expensive, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. In my opinion, it's got that gruff, raw V8 sound, which, surprisingly for Gran Turismo, actually does the car justice. Many of the car sounds on the game are way off, but this one actually sounds appropriate to the car. It sounds very guttural, very unrefined, exactly how the car should sound, like the Hulk gargling with marbles. That's what a GT40 should sound like. Now, performance is, not surprisingly, very strong. The GT40 has always been a fast machine, and it wouldn't have won the Le Mans many times as it did if it wasn't a competitive machine. And against the other classics on the game, it is a very competitive car. Now obviously, if you put it up against something like a Chaparral 2J, it's going to lose. But if you put it up against, say, the XJ13, or the Ferrari P4, or the Daytona Cobra, it's a very competitive car against its peers. Now what sets it apart from those cars? Well, unusually for such an expensive vehicle, it's a non-premium car, and as far as I can remember at the moment, it's actually the only 20 million credit car that is not a premium model. Now that may sound disappointing. Obviously that means it doesn't have an interior, and the quality is still pretty much PS2 quality graphics. Slightly revised obviously, but still not exactly PS3 level. However, this is actually the only car in the game that I don't want them to premiumise. Now, obviously they're going to at some point, but I actually don't want them to. And that may sound strange to say, and like I said, it's the only vehicle in the game that I feel that way about. And the reason why I feel that way is because the rough-edged design of the car, which is technically inferior to a premium model, is actually really nostalgic for me. It reminds me of when I was much, much younger playing this game, and the GT40 would come up a lot, obviously, and I always loved the car, especially the way it sounded. And the way it sounds hasn't really changed that much, thankfully, throughout all of the games. It's always been one of the best sounding cars available on Gran Turismo. And for me, the inferior graphics just remind me so much of those older days of the game that I don't really want them to change that. That probably sounds really strange, but it makes sense to me. But in terms of actual performance, it's a very strong car. The top speed, if I remember correctly, is around the 240, 250 mile per hour region. The acceleration is very strong, as you'd expect, and the handling, although definitely not a beginner's car, is actually nowhere near as challenging as you might think, because the one thing that's been also fairly consistent about the GT40, not only on Gran Turismo but on any game that it's been featured on, is that it's a challenging car to drive, a bit like the Cobra. But on GT6, with the right tuning of course, it's actually a very good handling car. Now, as with any vehicle, you can get the tail to slide out of course, but the handling is highly competitive, it's surprisingly user-friendly, not necessarily beginner-friendly, but user-friendly, because it does take more skill to get the best out of it. And overall, it's a surprisingly good handling car to drive. There's a very surprising amount of grip, the brakes are fantastic, and the weight displacement of the vehicle over its four corners just feels perfect, to me anyway. But the real thing about the GT40 is you don't buy it because of how good it may or may not be, you buy it because it's a GT40. It's that legendary machine. And if you're looking for a collector's piece that can actually be a competitive car to use, not just to look at or to cruise in, then the GT40 is definitely the car for you. Now, it is hugely expensive, it's 20 million credits, but that's only 3 hours work on the Red Bull Standard Series. Obviously, if you're not at the level of driving to do that, it will take a bit longer doing it other ways. But of the 20 million credit cars, it's my favourite. And although it's not necessarily the fastest classic in the game, it is still a hugely competitive one all round, and I would actually say one of the best all-round classics in the game. So, that's it for this review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.